You've planned for small group. Now what? Effective planning for small group instruction. From the Division of Academics Math Department, and I'm Ashlyn Cage, your high school content trainer. If you look over here to the side, you see a QR code. Please scan that QR code to get this presentation and all the resources that will be presented in this presentation. If there's not a long enough pause for you to get this, please pause your video to get that QR code, and it will show up later. So the first thing we want to look at is the instructional focus for DOA in the EBR math department. In today's session, we will look at implementing interventions, intervention types, data samples, examining standard-based resources for creating small group activities for independent work. This is what the resource page looks like for the documents and the presentation. And here's the QR code again. Remember, you can pause the video to get the QR code. All right, we're implementing intervention or small group. So the first thing we want to do is identify our students. We want to split our students into groups according to their achievement levels based on the standards. So the split should be based on student results from an exit ticket, a quiz, a CFA, or interim assessment. So it could also be an end of module assessment. It could be a topic quiz. So you have plenty of options, but it should be based on the standards. So when identifying the students' performance errors and misconceptions, this work can be completed during data PLC meetings or planning time. So after you look at the standards, you want to look at what skills are, what errors or misconceptions did my students have after I saw they didn't do well on a certain standard. So for instance, looking at their work, well, I see they did bad on this standard. Why did they do bad? Maybe it's because they struggle with adding and subtracting negatives, multiplying fractions. It could be so many different things. They didn't know the geometry definitions, which are very important when working with geometry. So when could this occur? So this could occur on your flex days or during the elaboration evaluation portion of the lesson. So I would try to take 30 to 35 minutes to implement the small group intervention. So the district interventions that we have, Dreambox, Math Nation. And if you have lower grades, you have Zern as well. An assessment that is offered by the state. So teachers can meet the needs of students and provide differentiated learning by using either of these three types of intervention: lesson skill-based, standard-based, diagnostic interim-based. So with any of the intervention types, you want to make sure your student work has been graded and you have given feedback as well, and arrange those from least to greatest or greatest to least. Then you want to split those students into groups of by the three levels of achievement. Again, be sure to share the results with them and give them that individual feedback so they know exactly what their misconception was or where they were struggling at. Don't say, oh, you didn't do well. Well, what did I do well on? Well, you didn't do well on solving systems of equations. You understood how to set up the equations, but when it came to solving them or substituting x in for y, that's where you struggled at. And then even giving them a sample or an example of where they went wrong. So intervention type 2 is standard based. So again, you're going to grade the student work and arrange it from least to greatest, and then represented by the three levels of achievement again. Extend their learning through the use of the achievement level descriptor. So what does mastery level look like? What does basic look like? What does advanced look like? What are they missing to get to that next achievement level? So if my student is a basic, how can I get that student to move to that mastery level of that standard? And remember, you also can use our standard at a glance documents, because it will give you the standard, and then it will give you the companion document, the achievement level descriptor beneath, and questions and resources based on just that standard. So that would also be helpful as well. And again, please give your students feedback so they understand if they need more support or enrichment. The next type is looking at diagnostic and interim based data. So I would not use my ANET interim, my ANET diagnostic data. Remember, that is based on the previous grade level skills. It will show you what skills or misconceptions the students have, and that can be built into grade level material to scaffold them to reach or to attain that grade level standard. So make sure it's not just you're focusing on an 8th grade skill, but you're utilizing that 8th grade skill to build them up to that high school standard. So planning for small group activities. So recommendations for targeted math support and intervention. So here are some common missteps that occur and the recommendations for them. So I'm going to give you a moment to look at these. All right. So remember, you also can pause if you need more time to look at this screen. But what I want us to focus on today are the 3 highlighted ones. So if you notice, the common misstep is trying to build from the ground up or going back too far in the learning progression. So what's the recommendation for that? Trace the learning progression, diagnose, and go back just enough to provide access to grade level material. Then we have the next one, choosing content for intervention based solely on the student's weakest areas. So the recommendation for that is focus on major work clusters from current or previous grades as it relates to the upcoming content. Another misstep, teaching all standards and intervention in a step-by-step procedural way. Recommendation, consider the aspect of rigor called for the standards when designing and choosing tasks, activities, or learning experience. So these are the 3 that we want to look at. And this will help us to create our intervention groups and our small group instruction. So there's a 3-step approach to address the gaps in learning. So make sure we understand, study the focus standards for upcoming instruction, identify critical prerequisite skills, and understand what students need to access grade level content. So you can look at the interim 1 or interim 5 technically, but the first interim that the students take are the diagnostic at the beginning of the school year that students take in ANET. You can look at that data and look at the standards that they struggle with. Well, based on these standards, what does my students need support in? Does it go along with the standards that I'm covering at this time? If it does, let's focus on this one because it aligns with the standard I'm looking at. And how can you look at that? You could use Achieve the Core, which this is coming from. You could use their Achieve the Core standard-based links that shows you a sequence of the standards and how they relate to each other from grade level to grade level. And it gives you a task with that standard as well. So then we want to diagnose. So determine students' understanding of prereq based on diagnostic or formative data. Consider if gaps exist for the whole class or for small group. So that's super important on how you will deliver this. Is that gap for a whole group or is it for a small group? Take action. Whole class needs. Plan to build needed scaffolds into the upcoming lesson. If needed, adjust pacing calendar to add in additional lessons. So also remember that you also have flex days. So those flex days could be utilized to adjust your pacing calendar and to add in the additional lessons. Or also scaffold using your bell ringer. All right, so my students struggle with a previous grade level standard that they need for this. Or the grade level before that, if I'm looking at geometry, I'm looking at 8th grade transformations. and I see that my students struggle with the transformations from 8th grade. So I'm going to pull a problem from 8th grade, make that my bell ringer, and then put another grade level bell question beneath it, or scaffold it to make it one full question. So then small groups needs, plan differentiated instruction, or coordinate to address gaps within intervention periods. So we have to make sure we do, as we said in the beginning, look at our students, split our students based on their achievement levels, and those could be our small groups. So now we're going to look at resources and materials to help us implement small group instruction. So the first thing we want to do is look at actual data sample. So here's a data sample. So if I look at this, I see where my students are performing. So we see the school and the network. So looking at SRTB5, I'm at 63%. So that's not one of the standards that I would focus on, because my students are doing really well with that standard. I would go to SRTA2. Given two figures, use the definition of similarity in the terms of similarity transformations to decide, and so on. So I would look at that standard, that's 6%. So is that a 6% because of the type of question, or is it because of the standard? So we also have to ask ourselves those questions as well. So let's go look at that. So if we notice, I clicked on the standard and this is what I got. So it was 2 questions, and that's also good because we have more questions that were being offered based on that one standard. So, and I see that they were given a multiple choice selected response, or a multi-select, or as they say, multiple select. So this lets me know it was the standard in this situation. They scored 6% on both questions. It wasn't because it was a multiple select. They also scored 6% on the multiple choice. So here is what the 2 questions look like. So the student struggled with both types of questions. So then now, since I've seen these questions, I wonder what I could do for my students. But then I want to take it a step further. So since I see that my whole group is struggling with this standard, and they're struggling with both types of questions, let's look a little deeper. So then I want to look at my student data. And so this over here on the side would be the students' names. I just cut that off because we don't need to know what students these were. We just need to focus on the data. So if you notice, right here is that standard. And look, I put this one up here too, 4%. So this is another standard we could look over. And if you notice, these are major standards. So this is a major topic that they would see on the LEAP test. So looking at this, I see I have students who didn't get any of the questions right. Then I had students who got one of the questions correct. So then I could base my small groups on these students. Well, the students that got none of these correct, I could group those students together. And the students here who got one question correct, I could group them based on that. Or even if I went in and looked at each student individually, and not on a spreadsheet together, I could see which question they got incorrect. Because some of the kids may have gotten that multi-select incorrect. And so they may just need practice on multiple select. So in that small group, my main focus would be, giving them multi-select on this standard, but also multi-select on other standards because they need support around multi-select. And also make sure we tell them how many to choose, because on the LEAP test, it tells you choose 2, choose 3. And then it limits them to that amount that it told them to choose. So definitely give them more room into, or give them a better access into getting those multi-select correct. So remember, when we're looking at planning for a small group, we should diagnose, plan, deliver, monitor. Monitor should happen throughout. Planning should happen throughout because things can change. So understand, diagnose, take action. So to help your students, you could look at the foundational study of the standards for the current module. Remember, use the companion document, acceleration guide, or the coherence map to identify the related standards. So remember, that's from Achieve the Core, the coherence map. And companion document and acceleration guide is from LDOE. And most of those things are linked here. And so this is what we're looking at, geometry again. So if we want to look at the modules, we can see the standards that are being covered in that module, and then the prior foundational standards that came before that. So if you look over here, here are SRT standards. And so we see that most of our material, or our foundational material, came from 8th grade. So maybe incorporating one of those 8th grade questions that aligns with the SRT standard that we scored 6% on to help our students to gain access to that. Or even going back to 7th grade, just to allow our students to feel success. So build that question, scaffold that question to make it to where, oh, I start off with this 7th grade skill, building up to 8th, building up to my geometry standard. And if you need support around how to do that, please reach out to me and I will support you with that. So then here, remember, you can use our scope and sequence document, and it gives you the standard and additional activities you can utilize. So this can help you with your small group, and it'll help you with the standard focus small groups. So planning for teacher-led groups. So one great resource that you could utilize for planning for teacher-led groups, so we're talking about our small groups, and so one of the small groups can be teacher-led. So what you could do is use the acceleration document. So I'm showing you the acceleration document. So it gives you the standard of the grade level. Then it gives you the previous grade level standards. So, and then the standards that are concurrent. And so also here it gives you ones that are taught in advance. So I would look at that standard, that was one of my lowest performance standards, and see which one of these previous grade level standards would help me with supporting my students with my grade level standard. And if you notice, there are also Algebra 1 standards, because remember, they also use Algebra 1 skills in geometry. And so then we have the Accelerate resource. And so you can utilize this as one of your teacher-led groups. So there's a screener, and which is a diagnostic. And so the screener can be done by the teacher, or if you do not have time to do each student individually, you can use the assessment resource that is provided by LDOE, that is linked in the Accelerate document that is in the resource page that I sent, that is included in this presentation. If you go to that, you can see the assessment document, and it will give you the diagnostic to go along with the standards. Then here is the tutoring session. The tutoring session involves a slide deck where you go through things based on the standard to help students with area and perimeter in the coordinate plane. And so then after you're done doing that small group with the teacher leading it, then you can have the students to practice or to move to another small group. And then at the end of the class, you can have those students, or whichever students you have working on the standard, to complete the exit ticket to see if they have a better understanding of the skill. So in one of your other small groups, you could have Math Nation going. And see, I included the standard that the students were low on. And so if my students struggled just with like maybe one of those questions, or I felt like they needed additional practice just to help support them to continue to understand that standard, I could utilize my Math Nation, and they could complete the notes from Section 4, Topic 7, based on that standard. And then if I wanted to see how they did on just that standard, I can have them to do the check for understanding after they can complete the notes. So also here, if you click any of these links, it will take you to a document. Let me show you on the next slide. A document where it includes all the standards from that grade level, from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2. And then it tells you the actual section number and topic that is aligned to that standard. So if that wasn't the standard that your student scored low on, I would find the standard that my child scored low on, my student scored low on. And if you notice, there are blanks here. So this could be how the student scored this year versus how the student scored last year. So you could utilize it for that. Or how did my overall student do and how did that individual student do? Because remember, we want not our school to grow 3 to 5%, but we want our students to grow 3 to 5% as an individual. So definitely look at their data and see if they're growing. So planning for independent work. So like I was saying before, where there could be a teacher-led small group, a Math Nation small group, a Dreambox small group. You can use the rotation system where if we're doing 30 minutes, well, maybe we only have 2 different activities they're doing, and we rotate through those activities. The students who are doing enrichment may not need to come to me. Maybe I just give them another lesson that is ahead of where they are and let them take the diagnostic on that standard to see if they understand that skill. And if they understand that skill, I could keep moving them forward. Or if that student doesn't understand that skill, what misconception do they have before I teach this standard to the entire class? How can I help them to better understand it? A self-selected system. So if you notice that all your students are in the same place, which could be possible, but most likely not, students could do a contract and a planning sheet and be held accountable for their work by using math menus, choice boards, which are some examples that can be utilized. So they could select what they're doing. And so you could just give them options based on the selected. And it could be all the standards that they scored low on. Well, you have this standard, SRT, and GCOB5. Well, I'm going to put all these standards on here, but I'm going to put an activity based on those standards. And you can choose which one you do. But by the end of the time, you end up doing work on all of those. So this is an option, a math menu, where there are things that the students must do and their choices. And so I'm just leaving it here. And remember, you can pause the video to look through this. You could do a choice board where the students choose. So like for instance, for this group, they have different types they could do. Fluency station, which in high school we probably wouldn't utilize the fluency station. That could be teacher-led group. Choice board, tic-tac-toe. So tell them they only could go vertical or horizontal going through the middle, or they have to go through the middle and make that middle activity the must-do assignment. And then let them have 2 other choices that they could choose from. Then you have the sample station recording sheet, which is super informative, where you can name the activities, date completed. One thing I learned from this activity: is there anything you want your teacher to know about this activity? And you can even take these questions a step further. So if I know that my students are working on certain standards, I can base my questions on what they're learning. So I could give them key questions that will let me know if they understand what they were doing that day. So I could include the objective to see what my students comprehend, and then include those key questions to see what my students actually know. So you could take it a step further and make a recording sheet including those things, just to get direct feedback from the students on how they feel the small groups went. So if you have any questions, please reach out to the math department. And again, I'm Ashlyn Cade, And if you need any support around the things that were discussed in this presentation, please reach out. Thank you.